Hello and welcome to week 8's lecture. This week we're going to be focusing on spirituality and play. So looking at the agenda, we're going to talk about play, the characteristics of play, the types of play, the stages of play. Then we're going to make some connections between spirituality and play, go over the discussion board activity, and then highlight the homework for this week. This lecture should be on the shorter side. Let's see if we can do it. Okay, so play. When we think about play, what is it that we're envisioning? So some of the characteristics of children's activities that could be considered play have these particular characteristics that we can highlight, right? So if you look at children interacting with each other and you can identify these characteristics, then you could easily say, okay, well, yes, it falls under the category of play. And I'm saying this sort of like a tongue-in-cheek because, of course, when we see children, we can automatically spot, when they're playing or when they're immersed in a task that is different than play. But highlighting these characteristics is going to help us keep in mind what kinds of play activities we want to make available for children that have these particular salient characteristics. Okay, so play needs to be intrinsically motivated, meaning that there's no exterior motivation, there's no exterior prize for them to attain by engaging in the activity of play. The motivation is intrinsic, it's internal, it's the satisfaction of engaging in that activity. It needs to be freely chosen, meaning that the children need to select what is it that they want to engage with in order to play. It can't be imposed. You can, I guess, but it's not recommended that you just give something to a child and say, okay, now you play with this. The child needs to be excited and curious and wanting to interact in that particular play scenario. So it for the most part, needs to be freely chosen. Play is enjoyable and it's engaging for the children and it produces pleasure for them. Again, going back to the intrinsically motivated characteristic. So we want to make sure that they're having fun, that they're enjoying the activity in order for us to be able to call it play. It's done for its own sake. Again, there's no rewards, there's no prizes, there's no end result for it, but it's own activity, its own engagement in play is the satisfaction for it. It tends to be active, but activity can be seen from a physical perspective, but it can also be seen from a mental perspective. So it might not be physically active, but it's mentally engaging. So there's that active undertone to play. It's self-oriented rather than object-oriented, meaning that, again, we're doing it for this self-fulfilling pleasure and not in order to achieve a goal. And it can be non-literal, meaning that there might be, and when we're talking about children, there most often is a lot of make-believe situations that are enacted through play. So what types of play could we see or could we promote in our classrooms? Rough and tumble play. And rough and tumble play means that there's a lot of gross motor activity involved. It can get rough, as the name indicates. And so sometimes adults frown upon this type of play because children can get hurt. But if we look at the reasons why children engage in rough and tumble play, depending on the cultural context and the cultural lens that we look at this type of play, that we use to look at this type of play, its acceptance, social acceptance is going to vary. In the US, we tend to want to have children calm down and not be too rough. and prevent them from getting hurt. In other cultures, rough and tumble play is encouraged because it's going to give children physical and gross motor possibilities to develop these gross motors and physical skills. So it's encouraged. But again, most of these types of play are going to be contextually determined in terms of how we support or how much we encourage them. And rough and tumble play is one of the types of play that is the most sort of problematic because it really depends on the culture in which it takes place. Imaginative play is, as its name indicates, a lot of imagination, a lot of fantasy, a lot of pretend is happening in this kind of play. Object play is when children are engaged with an object that could be a puzzle or Legos or blocks, and the play revolves around that particular object. Body and movement play have to do with dancing and sort of representational kind of play where you're using your body to represent other things. And there's a lot of fantasy and imaginative play in that kind of fantasy, and using your body to represent something else. But it's more about the body itself. So the element that you're using to engage in play is the body. And then there's games, when we play Monopoly or when we play Scrabble or Candyland for the younger ones. Game boards, games outdoors, games like sports like soccer or baseball, or we engage in plays that have rules and norms around them. This image that we have here of types of play are other classifications of play that you can see relate very similarly to the types of plays that I just explained. So if you see another way of calling rough and tumble play is active play. Imaginative play could be called make-believe play. Object play can be playing with manipulatives. Body and movement play could be creative play. And games could be sort of learning or sort of academic kind of play. Okay, so let's look at the stages of play. So depending on the author that we consult, the stages that they propose are going to be a little different. And here in this table, which is I think a really great summary of the stages of play and development according to different authors, and it's really helpful because it gives us the ages of the children here in this first column to the left. And then on the row on top, it gives us all the names of the different authors that are being summarized here. So you have Piaget's cognitive development stages, you have Erikson's social emotional development stages, which depending on which stage the child is at, cognitively and social emotionally, then certain types of play and certain stages of play will be expected for that child because of the age that he or she's at, and then the cognitive and social emotional development level in which they're placed because of their age and their development. The most common or known authors that talk about stages of play are Parten and Smolansky. And Parten talks about solitary play, parallel play, associative play, and cooperative play. And the differences here, you'll see that they're associated with the age of the child, and it's really closely related to their cognitive and social emotional development. So what are they capable of doing at this particular age is going to be reflected on the type of play or the stage of play in which they're in. So solitary play, children play alone with toys. There might be other children near, but they're really not aware, and they really do not interact with the other children. And there's a lot of repetition, and there's a lot of practice, and there's a lot of inquiry to discover how things work, but there's not a lot of socialization in solitary play. Smolansky calls this functional play, and it's where children are interacting with materials to discover how they work. Piaget also talked about stages of play, but they're not as commonly used because Piaget's theory was more used for its cognitive development stages than for his proposition of play stages. So the next stage of Parten is parallel play, where children play side by side, each concentrated on their activity, on their play scenario, without really interacting or engaging with others. They might be aware that the other child is there, but they're not necessarily sharing or interacting with them. Associative play, there might be pairs of children or small groups of children playing in the same vicinity, in the same area. They might be sharing materials. They might say 3 or 4 children in the block area all playing with blocks. And they might share and interact, and I need that block, and can you pass it over, and here's this one, and use that one, and they can communicate and socialize in that way, but they're not working together towards the same goal. So that's the difference with cooperative play. In cooperative play, they're working together to attain the same goal. And they have, for example, in that same block area, they might be building a zoo. So everybody's contributing to build this zoo. And the end goal is to have a completed building that represents a zoo. And they all know that that's the goal, and they're working towards it. In associative play, there's no goal, there's no shared goal. There might be shared materials, but they're not working together to reach a goal. And in Smolansky, we talked about functional play, trying to discover the properties of objects that they're playing with. Constructive play, where they're using materials and manipulatives to create a structure or to create something. They have a goal to create something. Dramatic play is when they're using pretend play and fantasy play. And then games with rules, where there are certain rules and goals and roles that the children enact together in order to play. But as you can see, Smolansky's stages of play are about the child's interaction with the object or the child's role in the social experience, while Parten's stages of play are more about the social interaction and who the child is socially interacting with. Is it directly with another child in order to achieve a goal, or is it by themselves with the object or the experience that they're immersed in? Lastly, here in this chart, we have Vygotsky's levels of make-believe play, and as you read them, level 1, 2, 3, and 4, they all are going to be a little more complex as the child gains experience with play and grows a little older, and they are focused more on the roles and the complexity of the play activity, more so than the interaction with the objects or the interactions with the children, with other children. So this is a really good table to have handy to know, okay, what kinds of play are children engaged in, and what are our expectations? What do we expect for them at different points in their development? This next one is one that I kept in here because I think it might be useful if you wanted to create a profile of the children that you're working with, or a particular child that you're observing, to know what their play pattern or their play profile looks like. And so you can use a sheet that looks something like this, and both of these tables are coming from Feeney, Moravec, and Nolte's 2016, I believe, or maybe it was 2015 edition of the book Who Am I in the Lives of Children by Pearson. published by Pearson. So here you could use something like this, in which you identify the child's name, you identify the date that you're observing the child, and you have Parten's social play stages appear, the solitary, parallel, associative, and cooperative. And then you have Piaget's cognitive play stages, the functional, the constructive, the dramatic, and the games with rules, so that you can quickly check here what you observe the child do. So the instructions, if you read the instructions, the recommendation is for you to observe the child every 10 minutes for about 15 seconds while they're engaged in free play, open play activities. And then check the boxes that best describes the child's type of play and the social involvement in which the child is engaged in. And if you do this for subsequent days over 1 or 2 weeks, then you can easily create a profile of where the child is in terms of play, both in the social aspect using Parten's stages and in the cognitive aspect using Piaget's stages, and then really paint a picture of where this child is in terms of play. And one of the reasons this is important to do is because children learn through play. And as teachers, we really want to identify what are the best ways in which we can help children learn. And if we know what stage of play they're in, we can facilitate more of those types of play for those children. So the play profile can be used then for planning and for looking at your classroom and seeing what kinds of materials you have out, what kinds of stations you have available, and then looking at your class schedule and seeing how much time you have allocated for different kinds of play during the school day. Okay, so the teacher's role in play. There's 5 roles that you as a teacher can enact when thinking about play. The stage manager is when you're enacting the role of setting up the stage, putting the classroom together, knowing what kinds of toys, what kinds of games, what kinds of manipulatives, what kinds of books, what kinds of concrete objects you're incorporated into the classroom, how are you going to locate them, and then also how much time in your classroom schedule you're going to allocate to allowing the children to interact with these materials that you're setting up. So you're kind of like the behind the scenes stage manager, prepping everything so that when the children come in, they can easily engage with everything that you set up for them. So that's one role. The second role is the observer, and we talked about that play profile sheet where you're observing children play and be able to identify what types of play they prefer, what stage of play they're in, and sort of and then how can you help them move to the next stages or engage in different types of play if they typically prefer just one. So being an observer is going to give you many tools in order to then plan and facilitate learning for children through play. And just observing them play and taking notes and using those notes then to further plan. The mediator and the protector is a role that is going to be really important because it's going to help you protect the play activity when it's happening. And you're going to also mediate and perhaps facilitate problem or conflict resolution when they happen so that the play can continue to occur. So you can be observing, and when you see that something is going to disrupt a play scenario, you can intervene and mediate, right? So that's another role. The participant role is also an important one because you can be part of a play scenario. You can start playing and include the children, invite the children to come play with you and help them get engaged in play. And as you're doing that, you can role model how to interact with certain materials, how to interact with other children, and you can sort of model this for them. It's important when we're the participant or when we're participating in play to be mindful that is serving a purpose. We're participating because we want to role model, or because we want to introduce or model how to interact with a particular material while we're introducing a new material to the children. But then we need to step back and let the children interact, because sometimes I know this happened to me a lot, that we get so excited in playing that we forget that the game is not there for us, right? So even though we're having fun and engaged in it, we have to step back and let the children play and interact with the material and with each other. And the tutor is also sort of a model, but maybe not from a participant's perspective, but more so telling the children how to perhaps engage in play with others. When we look at children, we can notice that there are some children that are master players, children that know how to play really well, and that there's some children that are sort of onlookers, that are on the periphery of the play scenarios, looking in, and you can see that they want to play, they want to participate, but they might not know how. One of the really easy ways to participate in a play scenario and to get involved in it is to contribute something to it. So if a child is, for example, looking on other children that are making a block construction in the block area, and the child really wants to go in and play, or looks like he really wants to go in and play but doesn't really know how, you can suggest to the child, well, why don't you take this car and maybe this or this object, doesn't necessarily have to be a car, but whatever object that you think would contribute to the construction that the children are doing in the play area, why don't you take this and hand it over and suggest that they use it for X, right? And then you give the child an idea of an into that play scenario. So that's what a tutor could potentially do. Okay, so what are the golden rules for play? Things that we need to really keep in mind. Provide enough time. So children need time to play. And more often than not, if we look at the class schedules, there isn't enough time to play. But you want to provide 45 minutes to an hour of uninterrupted, open-ended play. If you can do this several times a day, if you can do it indoors and outdoors, if you can do it with different kinds of materials, with all the play areas open, with some play areas open, and just give them all the variety possible to really engage in play for a period of time that is significant and uninterrupted. Choose play materials to meet the needs and the interest of your children. So each child is going to be interested in something slightly different. So even though we have materials in classrooms that are specific for our age group, the children that we are working with might be particularly interested in something because of the social and contextual cultural environment in which they're in, or because one particular child is interested in this and has everybody excited about that particular topic. And then so you want to choose materials that meet the specific needs of your children. And they might change from time to time. They are definitely going to change from year to year, even if you're in the same grade level, working with the same age of children. Observe the children play. There's a lot to be learned in terms of the children's development and the way they learn through the way they play. Add materials as play happens to expand on the play. So you see the children are struggling to find something that is going to hold this tower up, or find something that represents this in the dramatic play area. And you're observing this and you notice it, then introduce the material, add the material in to help the play continue and expand it. Help children enter play scenarios. That's what the example that I gave before about the tutor, and model for the child how to enter into play scenarios that are already happening. Participate, but let the child take the lead. That's when we talked about the participant role. Remember that the play is about the child. It's the time for the child to learn and develop. So you can participate, but let them lead. Let them direct the play. Avoid teaching or instructing concepts during play. It's not the moment to go over the letters of the alphabet. It's not the moment to check and see if they know the primary colors. it's the moment to just engage in a very self-satisfying activity that is going to be meaningful just because we are doing it and not because we're learning something academic from it. And then redirect play if necessary, but don't stop it. So again, if you see that a conflict is arising, intercede so that you can diffuse the conflict, but do not say, okay, well, then I'm taking this away and no one plays with this and go do something else, right? You want to really try to resolve the conflict in a way that the children continue to play. Okay, so we said we were going to look at some of the relationships or connections between spirituality and play. So what connections can you see? If we've been reading about mindfulness, we've been reading about spirituality, we've been reading about using meditation in the classroom to promote mindfulness and spiritual growth in children. What are some connections that you see through play? So think about this. What would you say would be an obvious connection for you? In one of the readings that you have for this week that I wrote, which is finding or making those connections between spirituality and play in early childhood education, I talk about a survey of educators, and 45.5 of the educators that I surveyed mentioned free play, child-centered, child-directed play as an intentional way that they were using to nurture children's spirituality. So for them, nurturing the children's spirit, nurturing the child's connection with self, other, and other beyond us in order to find meaning and purpose in life could be achieved through free play. And intentionally then they designed their class schedule in order to provide enough time for the children to play. Other ways that they mentioned were through developmentally appropriate practices, which also promote learning through play. When we read the DAP book, we realize all the learning that is supposed to happen in early childhood ed is supposed to happen through play in order to be developmentally appropriate. They also mention opportunities for children to experience spiritual movements, defines as feelings of wonder, awe, joy, and inner peace. I think I'm reading this and I think that there's a mistake here. I think that these are spiritual moments in which they define and experience wonder, awe, joy, and inner peace. The activity that we're going to be completing in the discussion board this week is going to ask you to watch a video and then reflect upon all the things that we just talked about. So identify what type of play is being enacted by the children that you're observing in the video. What are the stages of play that are demonstrated by these children? What is the role played by the teacher? What is an area of development or skill that is being practiced or learned through each play scenario? And then also think about what aspects of spirituality are being nurtured through play in this video. And there's going to be a handout, sort of a worksheet that you can download and work on and then upload with your responses. So remember to do this and post back your responses after you watch the video. And this is the video that you're going to be watching. It's on the discussion board. And then also comment on one of your peers' posts. These are the references for this week. And then highlighting the homework, you're to complete the readings for week 8. There's a couple of articles on Blackboard for you to download and read. Then the discussion board for week 8 is on spirituality and play, which I just explained, analyzing the play video. And then meditation technique number 8 is also attached for you to practice this week. That is all, and I will see you again soon.